Welcome back. It is exactly 9:34 a.m. And I think at the end of all of this, the end of the ANC 55th elective conference, we're going to be suffering from analysis paralysis, with due respect to all of the analysts that we've been talking with up to now. And of course, we are going to also be doing further analysis on the show this morning with Professor Patrick Bond from the University of Johannesburg's Department of Sociology. We're going to be looking at the results of the elective conference. We're going to look at the way forward. And are things going to, in fact, change? I don't know. Let's hear what Patrick Bond has to say. Very good morning to you, Professor Patrick Bond. Welcome to the program.
Assalamu alaikum, Julie. Please call me Patrick. Nice to be with you again.
Walaikum assalam, Patrick. Lovely to be speaking with you, yes. Were there any surprises for you regarding the results of the conference, the top 7? I was quite surprised by the additional number added to what we had traditionally known as the top 6.
Yes, so obviously the ANC in Luthuli House needs administrative help, and they've had, with the late Jesse Duarte, with the expulsion of Ace Magashule, the operations in Luthuli House have been very, very strained, and Paul Mashatile, the Treasurer General, had to be the acting Secretary General and Deputy. So now they've got 3 new folks, and Fikile Mbalula has been in and out of ANC leadership forever and ever for several decades. So I don't think there'll be any real changes, just a strengthening. But of course, their most durable problem is finance. They have regularly found themselves unable to pay their workers, and they've been slapped with, I think, quite legally threatening letters from the tax and the unemployment insurance authorities for not having, sort of been proper employers. So maybe the ANC Luthuli House needs actually that extra couple of hands, and whether Fikile Mbalula, who's kind of a sloppy shoot from the hip kind of guy, is the right person is another question.
Okay. I heard on another media platform this morning, that Gwen Ramakgopa has hit the road running. She's already started having meetings trying to address the dire financial situation the ANC finds itself in, and hopefully they're going to try and get money to start paying the people, starting with their staff first. Do you think there's hope of them, trying to get the necessary finances to pay the people and get the party up and running sooner rather than later?
I think it'll be hard. And the reason is that President Ramaphosa in December 2017, you remember 5 years ago, barely beat Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. And his whole strategy that followed was to co-opt and pacify all of the people that he needed to get rid of from the Zuma government. Just take one example. That would be Malusi Gigaba. So he had to remove him from both, first of all, the finance ministry in 2018, and then as an MP. And to do that, and to do it not just with Gwedi Mantashe, with Malusi Gigaba, but so many others, you had to give them posh positions in Luthuli House. And that's really part of the dilemma that the let's say the white anting, or the sort of rot from within, continued, because President Ramaphosa's policy of a unified ANC meant he tried to bring his enemies inside the tent rather than having them outside pissing on him. And so that was I think, one of the major problems behind his finances. And then, of course, the question, well, who's going to pay? Because ANC as a party has relied upon major contributors, both from white and the Black Diamond businesses. I mean, the most important, Patrice Motsepe, another Putuma and Shleko. When President Ramaphosa in the CR17, he ran for president, we suddenly found all sorts of people, including the Nikki Oppenheimer or Johnny Copeland, or sort of white businesses chipping in with millions and millions of rands. But they've really grown, I think, quite tired and hurtful of Ramaphosa not delivering the knockout punches on their behalf as much as they would have liked, notwithstanding that Ramaphosa has been a very pro-business president. So I think they are struggling. They had a big business meeting a couple of nights ago as a sort of gala meeting on Friday night. And Paul Mashatile, the treasurer, and now deputy president, said, without you business people, we wouldn't be here. We'd just be a little pathetic NGO.
Okay, so talking about all of those big businesses that funded the ANC all these past 28 years, it seems like you say the funds are now drying up for various reasons. I'm not sure who is the author of this article, but I have something here which is suggesting that the ANC cannot fix itself and South Africa's last hope is business. What is becoming increasingly clear is that this ANC-led government is incapable of self-correction, and our last hope is business, big business, obviously. If South Africa is ever going to get out of this deep hole, it's because business has decided that it will make the country work. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that's mistaken. I think it's naive to, first of all, say there's a big business, because really there are two, aren't there? There's one kind of big business that's unpatriotic and engaged in some of the world's worst capital flight. So they're taking money out of the country. We have a treasury and a reserve bank that do a terrible job of regulating this. Even revelations today that the finance minister, Enoch Anangwanam, was admitting that the FBI had to tell the security cluster that the Reserve Bank was being hacked a few weeks ago. That was sort of quite a disturbing phenomenon. Now, the dilemma is that the patriotic business class, which you would typically find to be, the sort of black diamonds, the wealthiest black business people, they're not doing particularly well at reinvestment. Unfortunately, they've gotten a so-called pass the trash accumulation strategy. So they got some pretty dirty old mines to begin with, Patrice Motsepe and African Rainbow Minerals. And then in the last few years, they've even gotten worse mines, coal mines, which, although the coal prices soared, so they made huge profits. I'm thinking of Tungela, July Ndlovu, who took over from Anglo Coal, or Mike Teke, who's now leaving Seriti, but they made a fortune because the coal price has gone up. But that's really a kind of pass the trash, in the sense that these are huge liabilities to have coal mines these days. And I think that means our business community has this schizophrenia. White business, normally known as the most corrupt business elite in the world, according to PricewaterhouseCoopers. They do a biannual economic crime and fraud survey. And until 2020, when India took first place, with South Africa tied with China for number 2, our Sandton, Rosebank, Midrand, Stellenbosch, Central Cape Town, and Umhlanga businesses really were considered the world's most corrupt. In contrast, the government, according to Transparency International, ranked 110th most corrupt, kind of mediocre out of 180 countries. So we really have had a problem that I think helps explain Cyril Ramaphosa. I knew him and I worked a little bit with him in the early 90s in Soweto. It was a time when he was a leader of the Group of 10, the Committee of 10, and they were fighting against Eskom to get a flat rate that was affordable for people to have electricity in Soweto 30 years ago. He was the ANC Secretary General, but a committed Soweto leader. And then when he lost the struggle with Thabo Mbeki and he went into business, he got into some very, very dirty deals. And the first included JCI and Reggie's Bakery, and he really went bankrupt in the 98 crash. He came back and he became the favored partner, for your McDonald's and Coca-Cola, for Standard Bank, MTN, for Lonmin at the time. Then that led to the Lonmin massacre, the Marikana massacre, when Ramaphosa wrote emails to the police saying it's not labor, it's dastardly criminal. And then his own company, Shanduka, was unveiled in the Paradise Papers as using offshore financial, tax havens like Mauritius. And I think these are the kinds of, let's say, bad habits that President Ramaphosa would have picked up by being in the Johannesburg business elite. And I think in that sense, because aside from mining from 2002 to about 2008, we've seen a dramatic decline in the fixed investment, the machinery, plant, and equipment from business since the end of apartheid. So we've really seen, aside from that little bubble when we had a commodity super cycle for mining and a little bit of credit-related expansion, and aside from real estate speculation and Johannesburg Stock Exchange speculation, we've really seen an unpatriotic white bourgeoisie, if you excuse my French. And that means the white capitalists really are the last people, I think, to secure the future of South Africa. They want to take the money out and run as fast as they can. Unfortunately, last point is that Finance Minister Godongwana is really helping them do that by liberalizing exchange controls, by loosening the capital controls. For example, the most important are against the outflow by big insurance companies and institutional investors and pension funds. And in February this year, Enoch Godongwana allowed them an extra 4 trillion rand worth of outflow by reducing from 70 to 50% the amount of assets that they had to hold in the country. It's in all these ways, Julie, that I'd be very nervous if what happens from this Nasrec conference is President Ramaphosa feels weaker, big business feels stronger, especially the fossil-related, the offshore gas, the fracking, the coal companies, because Gwede Mantashe has such a powerful position now, having rescued Ramaphosa. This really will amplify all of the contradictions in our society and I think lead to the ANC losing power even further and faster in 2024.
Okay, so I spoke earlier on with an energy expert from the South African Energy Forum, and the question I put to him was, we've been told that the SANDF have been deployed to several power stations, Eskom power stations, to protect those stations from sabotage and vandalism and theft, etc., etc. This on the heels of Andre de Ruyter's resignation. The person that I spoke to, this expert, blamed the sabotage, the vandalism, all of that, all the failings of Eskom squarely at the door of white monopoly capitalism and Andre de Ruyter. He's saying that the worst thing that could have happened for Eskom was to have Andre de Ruyter heading it up for these past couple of months. Your thoughts on that? I mean, 28 years later, after democracy, the advent of democracy, is it still fair to be pointing a finger at white monopoly capitalists? Are they still around? Do they still have such a big hold on the country? And are they then the people that would salvage South Africa from the brink of collapse?
Yes, I mean, that would be ridiculous to expect WMC, which I think is actually more dangerous, not as white monopoly capital, but as Western multinational corporations. That WMC, which often overlaps very closely, that most of our WMC white monopoly capital became Western multinational corporations in 1999. For example, Anglo and De Beers and Old Mutual and SAB, right, the old brewery, now Anheuser-Busch, or Gencor became BHP Billiton, Liberty Life. They all ran away as fast as they could to New York and especially London and Melbourne to celebrate democracy, right? They left. Now that WMC, that old myth, not a myth, but a reality, is actually, let's call it, amplified by the trends in Western multinational corporate power, neoliberal policies, capital flight. And now the Eskom factor, definitely I would blame on WMC Western multinational corporations like the single largest consumer of our electricity, which is BHP Billiton, because they did a deal in 1992, which unfortunately Vali Musa, the chair of Eskom, renewed during his time in the mid-2000s for the cheapest electricity at about 12 South African cents a kilowatt hour. And they consume the most, more than 7% of the grid. The second biggest, Sasol, was a white South African apartheid parastatal. Then it became Western multinational corporate because they moved to New York and moved a huge amount of their money in the form of a huge chemical complex, petrochemical complex in Louisiana that was a complete dud. And that's because of Andre de Ruyter not paying attention and sort of being suckered into investment there when he was a top guy at Sasol before he left. Now, the dilemma is that these companies like BHP Billiton and Sasol, which at Secunda squeezes coal with our electricity to create some drops of petrol that we should much more efficiently be importing. And that creates the single highest point source of emissions in the world, which gives us 500 megatons of emissions a year. And that in turn means we're going to have sanctions against all South African exports from the European Union That'll be starting in October, and it'll kick in January 2027 with a carbon tax, climate sanctions against exports. Now, this I would definitely blame on the minerals energy complex, Western multinational corporates that used to be white monopoly capital. But it's also now a few of the black diamonds, like the coal companies I mentioned. And I think that's actually the heart of the problem. And Gwede Mantashe is their greatest champion. But so was Andre de Ruyter. Even though he was pushing hard for renewables, 44% of what de Ruyter was pushing for was gas, methane gas. And that's Total and Shell, Johnny Copeland's HCI, Impact Africa, it's Petra SA. Those four especially have been doing the seismic blasting. And thank goodness for activists, for communities like Golobeni, the Amadiba Crisis Committee, Sustain the Wild Coast, the Fisher Folk, the community activists all over the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean coastlines, good environmental groups like Oceans Not Oil, South Durban Community Environmental Alliance, the Green Connection, and they've fought very hard to stop, with extremely good lawyers, to stop these gas companies from doing more offshore drilling offshore, so that in the courts and on the beaches and even here in Johannesburg in the protests against these companies' headquarters. So, I think, Julie, we should look at this as a big picture. Of course, Andre de Ruyter is a racist. He wrote racist emails at Sasol. He imposed racist load reduction against especially Black African townships. Okay, that's well known. He shouldn't have been in power. He shouldn't have been brought in. He ruined Nampak. He destroyed 80% of their shareholder value in the few years before he came to Eskom. He simply wasn't the person to make the necessary turnaround to a green new Eskom. So I think it's fine that he's gone. Although one is very despairing that it was there's some ridiculous calls of traitor from Gwede Mantashe that did it. But I think the main thing is, let's look at the structure of the economy and ask whether this economy is going to suit our generation, but especially future generations' needs, given that we're the third highest emitter of CO2 per person per unit of output in the world. Only Kazakhstan and the Czech Republic, of countries of more than 10 million people, are worse than South Africa. So that's what I would rather kind of look at as a sort of way to say, we're really on the wrong track. And I think we'll be even on a worse footing now with Mantashe having so much power in the ANC.
So does that then suggest perhaps a while ago, maybe 18 months ago or so, Gwede Mantashe was talking about those Turkish car power ships that were going to be docking, at our ports to supply electricity? Is that something like that going to become a reality? And then where do we stand? All right, you go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking that in particular is terribly important because they've just gone through the latest round of environmental impact assessment. I happen to file one of the criticisms because the car power ships are going to be run with methane. We're going to be getting that methane in especially Richards Bay, but also, I suspect, in the port of Implora and Kucha outside Nelson Mandela Bay, and then also from Saldanha. We're going to be getting that, or I should say the car power ships, if they do come in the next couple of years, from the so-called blood methane source in northern Mozambique, where Total, ExxonMobil, Eni from Italy, China National Petroleum, have basically hired through Emmanuel Macron, the French president who came just a year and a half ago to ask President Ramaphosa and President Paul Kagame of Rwanda to put our troops to defend their facilities against the Islamic insurgency, the Al-Shabaab community, often community-supported critique of the looting of Cabo Delgado. It's not just the natural gas, but it's the rubies, it's the hard timber, it's the graphite mines. And because that Islamic insurgency is so strong, 6,000 or so people have died, 1 million displaced. We're going to probably see the SANDF and the so-called SAMIM, Southern Africa Mission, deploying more troops to defend Total, so that we bring gas to Richards Bay through car power ships, create massive emissions, methane being 85 times worse than CO2. It's a really terrible spiral we're going down as a result of trying to bring gas into the grid with car power ships, and also a World Bank Transnet terminal in Richards Bay as, I think, the main guilty parties in that. And we should be decarbonizing, but also demethanizing. And that's why I think De Ruyter was so out of touch, because he wanted to use from that $8.5 billion that he and others had raised in so-called concessional finance, he wanted to use 44% of that to give us a meth addiction right after the coal addiction. And that would again bring on the climate sanctions. So it's good he's gone, I think.
Okay. We are running out of time. So enjoyed talking with you, but I need to get in one or two more questions here, very important ones. You know, we are told that poverty is not by accident, it is by design. Lower income, less educated, voiceless people are so much easier to control. And obviously, we know we here in South Africa are sitting with a youth unemployment rate of above 66%, whereas the global average is youth employment or unemployment. We're sitting at 66%. The rest of the globe is sitting at 6%. It is absolutely untenable. What does that say for us going forward? And the government, with the ANC elections up and coming in 2024, where do we stand with this issue? I've been speaking to a whole host of analysts, and we kind of get a sense we're on the brink of collapse. So, Patrick, how do you read the situation? And is clean energy the route that we go? And enough, I'm throwing different issues at you simply because of time constraints. Given that we are told that we still have coal in South Africa that will keep us going for the next 400 years.
Well, I think we've been able to disprove that coal is useful, given that even the two brand new coal-fired power stations are breaking down all the time. But also, I'm glad you're linking the issues, because, of course, the biggest threat to our youth is not merely the immediate unemployment and poverty, but it's that their lives will be destroyed by climate catastrophe. There's no question of that, really. And it's their anger, the generational rage that we haven't really seen come up in a coherent way. To make that an economic argument, I'd expected the economic freedom fighters to do much better. They've seemed to have sort of plateaued at around 11-12% of national support. But if, as you say, we see the continuing degeneration of the economy and even higher levels of youth unemployment, that's a political power block that potentially could be mobilized if the youth get registered to vote. And if there's ideology, if they form a party or be within the EFF. And that's something to watch for 2024, because that sense of the old guard, not only because they're fossil addicted and maybe methane addicted, and therefore creating the conditions for worsening climate catastrophe. I mean, what we saw in Durban with 500 dead on April 11, 12 this year with the rain bombs is just a foretaste. What we've seen with droughts, the day zeros in Gqeberha this year, in Cape Town threatened about 3 years ago. These are just a foretaste of the kinds of catastrophes. What we saw in Pakistan, more typically, where a third of the country is displaced. And there, I think our hope must be with the youth. And there are certainly some amazing youth who've taken up, like the famous Greta Thunberg in Sweden, the cudgels of trying to connect the dots and say, the youth need a future. That means immediate move to renewable, a just transition with jobs for the youth. We need climate adaptation. We need stormwater drainage. We need to clean up the sewage system in Durban. So there's plenty of public sector work to be done across the country. And it's time for the youth to be given those jobs and to make those links between their climate catastrophic future and the urgency of getting them to work for a genuine green new ESCOM, and to make our municipalities climate-proofed in the immediate period ahead. It's just a tragedy. We have a coal mining tycoon as a president, and he's being controlled by a pro-coal dinosaur, Gwede Mantashe. And I think that means 2024 is going to be the most critical election in the country's history.
In wrapping up then, I've been saying this for the past couple of years. I've been saying, and I've been asking the question to people like yourself and other analysts, is are we sitting on a time bomb here? Are we ready for a repeat of an Arab Spring here in South Africa?
Well, I hope so. Arab Spring, even though it's ultimately failed, gave us all enormous amounts of hope that the North African people, especially in Tunisia, in late December of 2010, when Muammar Barghouti, I think it was his name, was a young man who was selling fruit, and the police were brutal. The International Monetary Fund had said you need to put on a value-added tax, and Muammar Barghouti, I believe his name was, self-immolated. But in that terrible act of self-sacrifice, he sparked such a wonderful wave of democracy. And then, of course, it moved to Egypt, where the corrupt Mubarak regime was thrown out very quickly as well. So when you take Ben Ali and Mubarak and you think, well, maybe Ramaphosa and all the kind of elites around him need that sort of treatment, and Thabo Mbeki and Moletsi Mbeki predicting it, I think I would look forward with great optimism to an Arab Spring, to have a fresh, democratic, youthful wave to throw out the old guard. What do you think? I think we'll all be debating that and hoping for a renewal of a sort of democratic, liberatory spirit in this country that's been so oppressed by economic apartheid.
Absolutely, Professor Patrick Bond. I do look forward to talking with you again in the near future. Have a wonderful and a safe festive period. Take care on the roads. Until the next time, as always, a very, very prosperous new year.
And the same to you and the viewers. Thank you very much for having me.
That was Professor Patrick Bond. He's at the University of Johannesburg Sociology Department talking about, I guess, the state of the nation. What else can I say? It is exactly 10 o'clock. We'll be joined by my colleague Inayat Wadi in a minute or two to give us a wrap-up of the elective conference. He has been on the ground at Nasrec over the past 4 or 5 days, and he will truly be able to tell us just what went down. So do stand by.